As is the case with most budding interests, you tend to start by investing small chunks of money as you're getting familiar with this new world, and then growing from there. But when it comes to watch collecting, this can sometimes be more difficult than other interests as a result of mechanical watches being relatively a lot more expensive game, as just many of you know. But say you're either just getting started or just have a certain budget in mind and you want to explore this world of mechanical watches for the first time. Where do you look? In this video, I want to make the case why Japanese watch brand Orient is one of the safest places to start if you're early on in your journey or have a tight budget not allowing you to extend beyond $300. To help prove this point, I've highlighted 6 key categories: dive, dress, everyday, aviation, field, and complication, and have picked out corresponding watches from Orient fitting of the styles that would really allow you to scratch the itch of ownership without having to spend a ton of money compared to pretty much nearly every other manufacturer producing mechanical watches. Now, before we jump into this video, I definitely would recommend checking out our list looking at some of the top mechanical watches in the industry and brands to check out. If you're looking at those other pillars of where to maybe begin as you're starting your mechanical watch journey, we'll have a complete write-up down below. It will be in the description on teddybaldassarre.com. Now, starting with just a bit of history on Orient, the Japanese brand dates back to 1950. Today, often positioned in most cases as an approachable gateway for newer enthusiasts searching for their first mechanical watch. In the last 10 years or so, in particular with the rise of the internet watch community, Orient has reached new heights of popularity among enthusiasts in the market, with a collection of price-leading models across the majority of the most popular watch types that you're looking for out there. For decades, it was typically brands like Seiko or Swatch that would have a stranglehold on this segment, but with almost ridiculously low prices, in-house calibers, and some models that have achieved cult classic status, it has helped bolster up Orient's market position to the budding enthusiasts especially. But now with understanding that key background, let's now talk about our first category here with dive watches. As will be the case for each one of these sections, we'll briefly discuss each model, its significance, and general pros and cons associated with each of those models. Now, in a recent video, I argued that for the vast majority of new watch wearers or people that are looking to own that one and only watch, I think the dive watch actually makes a ton of sense with a combination of versatility, durability, legibility, and then just the sheer amount of options there are out there to choose from. And while Orient has a number of excellent dive watches from the Kano to the ISO certified Triton Neptune family, if I had to pick one dive watch that has the most appeal, I'd probably go for the 41.8mm Komatsu, a massive hit for the brand since its release in 2019. The watch has its fair share of attributes that proves its case, including its case, being wearable dimensions of 41.8, 12.8mm in thickness, and a compact lug to lug of around 46mm that makes it wear closer to a true 40 on the wrist, exhibiting a similar wearing effect as the storied Seiko divers. But I think a big reason why this watch has been such a huge hit is partially because it set a new standard for this price segment of under $300 for a dive watch. What could you really accomplish, as well as what should be the standard that maybe some consumers should expect. With this, you have a variety of different colors to choose from. Lume is very solid. You're also getting a movement on the inside, the F6922, which typically, as I'll mention throughout this video, I find that Orient movements are typically running really well in the spec department. Not always, because these are inexpensive mechanical watches at the end of the day, but typically doing very well in that department. Also, I think the big thing here, sapphire crystal on the front of the watch. Even with the likes of the Kano, which is going to be in a price range that is very similar, the sapphire crystal of the Komatsu, I think in many ways allowed it to be elevated. Now, there certainly are still some downsides with the Komatsu. Some are just not gonna like the general design, but I think the big things are maybe the bezel action not being as crisp as some other alternatives or Seiko options out there. And as always, the bracelet combination, not necessarily the best here. But with the accessible lug width here, you'll have no problem with different NATOs and other straps of your choice. And I think one final point has to be the non-ISO compliance of this dive watch. Not gonna be a true dive watch by that metric. There are some that are going to be slightly north, or that's where you start looking at the Triton Neptune family of watches if you do want that extra peace of mind and that true dive watch status. But if I had to pick one watch today that represents its category maybe better than any other, and also in the price segment in which it occupies, this would probably be it. Well, apart from the next one. Now for the dress category, little surprise here, but we have the Orient Bambino. This watch, unlike any other Orient, has become a cult classic and has become nearly a meme as a result of its gateway appeal to watch collecting since its launch in 2011. With prices around $150, give or take, the Bambino was probably the first Orient to really break through the noise and now being showcased in a variety of different versions and generations. Despite the many Bambino versions out there, and we've covered, the Gen 2 version 2 models have a close place in my heart, just given the fact that I've owned one in the past, and they also have a nice mix of contemporary and classic design attributes. To speak to some of the downsides of the Bambino, I think the first thing has to be the sizing. They are on the larger end of things for a dress watch. I wouldn't normally be as hard on a 40.5mm watch, but given that it is going to appeal towards the more dressy, classic side of the spectrum, I think that is a point worth mentioning. There is a 36mm mid-size option available as well as a side point. The odd number lugs, and I only bring this up because the stock strap is terrible, and you're talking about a watch and somebody that's going to invest maybe a very little amount of money in their first watch. Having the utmost versatility in the strap department that you don't have to invest in new straps all the time, maybe when the budget is tight, I think this is where the odd number makes way more sense. When you're talking about a watch that comes with an odd number lug width, but it delivers a good factory strap or bracelet with it, I'm less, I would say, strict when it comes to criticizing this point. But in this case, I think you have to mention it. Mineral crystal, I don't think this is something to necessarily nitpick at, but still something that people tend to bring up. But at the end of the day, why the Bambino is so beloved is partially because you have such a variety to choose from. You have many variations and generations. If you want something that's a bit more minimalist, you can go for the Generation 3. You want the classic Arabics, go for the Generation 5. If you want a nice mix and best of both worlds, maybe you go for the Generation 2 version 2. Another reason why I think the Bambino across the board gets a lot of love is just the fact that it's a well-finished watch for the money. No nonsense, does the job, and looks the part. For $150, it is hard to dismiss. And again, looking at the accuracy, just tested this example that we're showcasing in this video. Now, I don't want to set just not proper expectations here, but this one was running plus or minus a couple seconds off from perfect time of day, which to me is completely ludicrous for the price that you're dealing with here. But Bambino, I don't want to belabor the point anymore. I think you guys know, if you do know, about this watch. Now, a less discussed but also excellent option from Orient is the Maestro, and this is our everyday category. And this watch is candidly rather generic compared to something like the Bambino, but in turn, it uses this in its favor to offer more versatility in both dressy and casual environments. I did consider the commuter here as well. However, with the 40mm case in this instance that wears closer to a 30.5 to 39mm with the help of the abbreviated lug to lug, and more importantly, the 100 meters of water resistance, the Maestro is easily one of the leading everyday watches for under $200. Well, probably one of the only ones, honestly, from a mechanical perspective. I think the ultimate con when it comes to the Maestro and comparing it to some of these other options is it doesn't have the same amount of charm, especially compared to the Bambino. It just feels rather generic, and there's also no lume. But then on the flip side, you also are getting some great dimensions with the package here, better water resistance than the Bambino. You do get more casual looks, which will allow it to really walk that fine line between maybe dressing up, because it certainly can look the part there, and being appropriate on the more dressed down days. Variety of dial colors to choose from, and you get the versatility that comes with 20mm lugs. All right, so now we're getting into some more niche picks from the brand. We've looked at, I would say, some of the models that people strongly consider. Now let's get into the Pilot Aviation style watches. When it comes to this next inclusion, although this watch does not necessarily have a true name specified by the brand, the one most commonly associated with it, it's going to be the Orient Pilot. For those that want a watch with true aviation history, especially from the Flieger genre, you could make the case that going for this Orient is not worth it, and holding out for something like the likes of a Laca would make much more sense. I think that is certainly a valid consideration, but with a price of around $280, the Orient Pilot does make its own case based on the sheer value and some additional specifications such as solid lume and 100 meters of water resistance. This watch follows the format of Flieger's known as the Type B style dial, worn by navigators with the positioning of the 12 hours on the inside and the large numerals denoting the minutes on the outside to make it easier to read precise time with just a glance in the cockpit. This busier display might be off-putting to some, but when understanding the intended purpose, it does begin to make some more sense. I think the number one thing that goes against the Orient Pilot is just where it stacks up against the competition, and does it make sense to hold out for something like Laco or Stova or other brands out there that have some more rich history or true history in this field of creating this style of Flieger. If you're of that party, then this one is not gonna make as much sense, maybe not as compelling as some of the other Orients, but still, if you're just down to liking this style and want something that has great loom, is going to have a nice middle of the road sizing, maybe on the slightly larger side of things, this is going to be one to consider with 100 meters of water resistance and a nice solid movement on the inside. For our next category, we have the field watch. Similar to the pilot category, this is another genre of watch that might not be as definitive in terms of separating from the competition, given the competition from brands like Hamilton, Bulova, Marathon, CWC directly above, who actually have true military history in providing watches to different armed forces. Orient does still have a notable one to consider that is less of a purist approach with the Orient Defender 2. Now this second generation model takes the original version and makes an upgrade with the caliber and presents a more compact case for its proposed dimensions of 42 millimeters, wearing closer to that of a 40.5 to 41 millimeter case in actuality. With its day of the week indicator, your date, and 24-hour scale, it does offer a busier take on the conventional field watch style, which I think is good when you're trying to differentiate against the competition. In terms of its totality, this watch is going to probably be in alignment with more of an eccentric type of approach when it comes to the field watch design. If you want something that's more of the traditional DNA, this would not be the one to go for, but an upgraded F6 B22 movement on the inside. You have a mineral crystal here, which could be one drawback as you are seeing the price elevate here, but still 100 meters of water resistance. You have that everyday feasibility, solid loom, hacking and hand winding, and reasonable wearing dimensions on top of it. And now for our final category, we have Complication. And I'm not cheating here. I'm not gonna look at something that doesn't have a mechanical movement on the inside, because I think that's the reason why Orient is so compelling. They are producing mechanical watches at a really solid price range. And for that exception here, I wanna look at the Orient Sun and Moon. Now, if you're not familiar with the Sun and Moon, you might see this moon phase style indicator and think, what is happening here? This looks sweet. I didn't know that you could even get into a moon phase complication. Well, it's not technically a moon phase complication. It's actually a day and night indicator, but still with this type of look, it's one of the only true executions I can think of from a mechanical perspective doing it at this price range. So if you want to get that added complication of something as romantic as a moon or day AM PM indicator, this would probably be one of the best options to go for. Now, case size is going to be on the larger end of things when it comes to something of this style and format. I think of a more romantic traditionalist that's going to look in the direction of a piece like this, so it does have a larger profile for that. There is no loom on this piece. Sure, it is not going to be a true moon phase, but on the flip side, when looking at the competition of who is utilizing this style of complication in the market in general, typically have to pay much more. I think it's still well executed for the money because you're talking about sub $300. For someone that's trying to scratch that itch, I think this is probably one of the definitive choices that you can go for, and a very beloved model for those that are a fan of Orient or just like this added complication and style. But all right, guys, that is me looking at 6 different categories and making a case for an Orient to represent those 6 categories. Now, of course, you could certainly argue that Orient's not gonna be the just slam dunk pick for all of these categories, but it's very rare to find a brand that's able to answer all of these calls and then do it also under $300 each. That is very rare. I think this is why Orient has become this gateway, almost drug type brand for people that are starting to develop a love for watches, and for good reason. They deliver a solid product. It's no nonsense. Maybe don't have always the most inspired designs and are delivering the cream of the crop and exude luxury in any way. And we're talking about $300 here. But everybody starts somewhere, and I think it's important to also look back and locate where you can find good value if you're just getting started, because once you get hooked on this, and you do it the right way, you're gonna be a watch lover for life. I have yet to meet somebody that's fallen out of love with this beautiful, but also sometimes unfortunate hobby. So have fun, definitely check out these Orients. All right, guys, are there any other watches that you would consider in a list like this? Is there another brand you would also consider in this level and tier? I think you could certainly consider Seiko, maybe Timex, but I think Orient does a really good job of undercutting some offerings from Seiko and then just delivering, I think, a way better product than something like a Timex across the board, just in my opinion. But love to see comments down below. What do you guys think? If you did find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Really would appreciate that. And also, we are an authorized dealer of Orient if you do want to check out these watches. Inventory for Orient is pretty difficult to come by because they just sell out right away, and there is a difficulty when it comes to manufacturing and getting parts now. So that's one thing I will mention, but certainly a great brand to look at if you're just getting started. Also, be sure to check out that blog down below looking at some great mechanical watch options in the industry. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.